What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're looking at the best forwards at every single price point. So once again, if you need an expensive forward or a cheapie, I've got you covered. This will be the last in this little mini series. We've already covered goalkeepers, midfielders and defenders, so hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, do make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's jump into it. So as always, we'll start with the most expensive players and work our way down. When there's more than one player at a specific price point, I will put them in order of kind of best, second best and third best. Although in some cases, like with Harden and Kane, there's not always much to split them. And I would say straight out, if you've got Harry Kane in your Game Week 1 draft and he's locked in or you want to go for him, there's nothing wrong with that pick whatsoever. He's got some good fixtures, especially Southampton, Forest and Fulham in the opening 6. You could almost look to captain him in some of those if you wanted to. You know what you're going to get with him. He's Premier League proven. His underlying numbers are always good. Scores plenty of goals. Assists for Son all the time. He's on penalties. Going to play 80 to 90 minutes most games, etc, etc. The list of good points to own Kane just goes on and on. It's just whether or not you rate Haaland as slightly better, because essentially they are the same price, right? So that's all it comes down to. It's not that I think Harry Kane is awful. I just think that Haaland might be slightly better. And I also kind of like the way he rotates with Salah's fixtures for captaincy as well. Like that Bournemouth at home fixture in Game Week 2, I just can't stop looking at it. That could be massive, massive goals for Man City. And I feel like with Haaland, you're kind of, there's two sets of people really. Both sets look at his goal scoring record from the Bundesliga and the Champions League and realise it's excellent. But one half is kind of, okay, that's great, but can he come over and do it straight in the Premier League? Will he settle in quickly? Will Pep play him week in, week out? What will his minutes be like? Etc, etc. The other half are like, okay, scored lots of goals. He's coming over as one of the best young talents in the world. He's going into a team that create a lot of chances and they are looking for that number 9 to finish them off. And what he could potentially do, to be honest, if you're not a Man City fan, it's not even worth thinking about, basically. So that's the kind of side of the fence that I'm sat on. I just think what he could do could be pretty special even early on, and I kind of want a piece of that. But if I had to have Harry Kane instead, it wouldn't really bother me that much. So I think Haaland's ahead, but not by a huge amount. And then at 10.5 million, there's only one player, that is Cristiano Ronaldo. Apparently he wants to leave. I am recording this particular video in advance, a few days in advance of it going out. So maybe he'll have signed for someone else. Maybe he'll definitely be staying at Man United. I don't know right now, but I just don't think you can spend 10.5 million on Ronaldo when Kane and Haaland are only a million more. And it just feels like there's so much better ways to spend your cash. If he ends up staying, I'm sure Ten Hag will get something out of him again. I mean, he's one of the best goal scorers ever, so you don't need Ten Hag necessarily to get him scoring goals, but I'm sure he'll get him into that team and playing well. But ultimately, in pre-season right now, Sancho, Rashford and Martial are getting a lot of minutes, so depending on when Ronaldo comes back, he might not even start the season. I know that would be a big call if he stays at Man United for Ten Hag to leave him out, and it might not happen, but it is something worth thinking about, that he's not getting many pre-season minutes, and that could be a factor. So for me, whether he stays, well, if he stays, obviously, then he is an option, but 10.5 million is too expensive. And if he goes, he ain't going to be an option anyway. So I'm going to work my way up on this one, right? Richarlison, just not an option for me. I included him because he's the only player at 8.5 million. So he's basically been included for consistency, but I'm just not sure his minutes are going to be that great. He's also suspended for Game Week 1 anyway. And if you just think that Son and Kane are obviously going to be nailed and play pretty much every game, it means he's got to get into that right-hand side instead of Kulusevski. And I don't think that's going to happen that often. So I think he's going to be more of like a rotation player, maybe come on with the 5 subs, maybe get kind of 15, 20 minutes in a game, play those lesser games. For FPL, unless we see something early on or at some point during the season or there's injuries, I just don't see how we can put him in our team. So he's just a complete avoid for me. Darwin Núñez I quite like. Just again, it's a bit like when I talked about midfielders with Fernandes and Sterling. In their own right, they're good players, and so's Darwin Núñez and so's Vardy, but that price point just feels a little bit awkward when you know what else you can get. A lot of people are looking at maybe putting in a premium forward like Haaland, like Kane, or they're looking to spend a little bit less because they want to put more money into defence and midfield, and I can't really argue with that. So I can sit here and say that yes, Darwin, if he gets good minutes, will be a good option, should score plenty of goals, but then I think about that Liverpool team, I think, well, I definitely want Salah, I definitely want Trent. Diaz is $1 million cheaper and Robertson's $2 million cheaper. They possibly both better for minutes, And to be honest, I don't really see, even with Darwin Núñez plays the same minutes as them, I don't think he necessarily outscores them either. So there's just too many unknowns to spend 9 million. If you're a Liverpool fan or you really like him as a player, fair enough, you put him in. I don't think he's a bad option. He should get fairly decent minutes. But obviously Firmino is still there. Jota will come back from the injury that looks like he's going to keep him out for game week 1 as well. And there could be some rotation there. I just think for Liverpool there's better options, which is why I can't include Darwin Núñez in any of my drafts. And then again, with Vardy, I think like every season for that past couple, I've said he's another year older now. Can he keep on playing on? And he does. And they've got no Europe this year. So he will be, I'm sure, as long as he's fit, the #1 striker again. And he probably will score plenty of goals. He is on penalties too. At 9.5 million, it's a decent enough price with him. I think if he was 8.5 or 9, I'd be a bit more tempted. I feel like that 9.5 would just put too many people off. The opening 3 fixtures are okay. I think Brentford and Southampton at home are pretty decent. He could go and get something at Arsenal away. After that, Chelsea away, having to play Brighton away as well. Man United at home, if they can kind of buck their ideas up and start defending a little bit better under Ten Hag, I just think a lot of the opening 6 fixtures aren't great for Vardy. I wouldn't put it past him to go and score, goals in most of these fixtures and come away after the first 6 with like 3 to 5 goals, especially with penalties. But again, it's that price point. When I think about how people are structuring their squads, I don't think most people have got a spot for a 9.5. So I don't think we have to go out of our way to put him in. He could definitely be a good option, but I think most people will look elsewhere, and I will too. So those of you that have watched a few of my pre-season videos, you'll know I really like Gabriel Jesus. I think he is going to be their out-and-out number 9. I know kind of in Nketiah at the end of last season, there was talk about him leaving so he could get minutes, and then he re-signed a new contract, presumably either or for both, like money and, a bit more game time. I just don't see how that happens with Gabriel Jesus. Whether there's the 4-2-3-1 or the 4-3-3, they're only playing with one player up front, and I just don't see how that's not Gabriel Jesus week to week. Some of the lesser games and stuff like that, maybe Nketiah plays, but for these first 6, I just don't see how Jesus doesn't line up. His underlying numbers are extremely good for Man City. I don't expect them to fall, and I know a lot of people see him as this player that misses a lot of chances, but he also gets into very good positions. His movement in the box is decent. I think he's going to thrive as the main man for Arsenal as the number 9, right? Not in that Pep Guardiola system where sometimes he's playing on the right. He's also not necessarily always in the team. That's different at Arsenal, and I think he's going to love it, and I think he's going to score plenty of goals. So I do have Jesus as the best £8 million option. Havertz is not necessarily that far behind. I think with Chelsea, again, I'm recording this in advance, so who knows what might happen in the transfer market, both incomings and outgoings, because there's talk about them possibly selling Broja. I don't know if that will definitely happen. They don't have an out-and-out number 9. Lukaku's obviously already gone on loan. So if they don't bring someone in, I do expect Havertz to play as the number 9. Again, his goal threat is pretty decent. Like, he's a good player. His movement is decent. And I expect him, Sterling, and maybe Werner or whoever else plays there to be quite a fluid front 3. Front 3. I can't get that right properly. So I do really like Havertz. And to be honest, if you look at his overall fixtures, kind of first 5, they are quite comparable to Jesus. It's a bit like Saka versus Mason Mount, right? I think because they've got that Spurs at home fixture in game week 2, it doesn't look quite as good. But Everton, Leeds and Southampton are all really good. So again, if you've got Havertz in your team, I wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to swap him to Jesus if you've got that kind of gut instinct that you think Havertz is better. I really like him as an option, but for me, I just think Jesus is ahead. And with Calvert-Lewin, I think his price is too much. I think he should have come in cheaper. But on the flip side, I know that he can do well for that price point, right? He'll probably have penalties now Richarlison has gone. He did get them at one point, and then Richarlison seemed to get them back. But he shouldn't have them with Richarlison not there anymore. The fixtures are good. His underlying numbers are usually pretty decent. Last season was a write-off, right? He was injured for a lot of it. But if Lampard can get him playing again, as he did before, I quite like him for those opening fixtures. If this was still under Ancelotti, I would strongly consider putting him in. It's hard to justify it maybe ahead of Jesus and possibly even ahead of Havertz, but we know that Calvert-Lewin can score plenty of goals for that £8 million price point. It just so happens that this year there's probably 2 better options. So I wouldn't completely write Calvert-Lewin off, but I would probably avoid him just because Jesus is there and it's hard to go against him right now. So I think in seasons gone past, this bracket would have been a little bit more popular, right? 7.5 million for Bamford, Wilson and Watkins. If they're fully fit, ready to go, doesn't seem that bad. I do think this year, though, people are looking at it and thinking, well, for 0.5 million more, I can get Arsenal's number 9. For 0.5 million more, I can get Chelsea's number 9. And that is why not many people are talking about them. I think for Wilson and Watkins as well, the fixtures aren't great. I do quite like Bamford. I think he's a player that we're all going to ignore and could come away from the first 6 fixtures with plenty of goals, especially with penalties under his belt as well. He should get them back. I mean, he had them, and obviously he then got injured. Then Rafinha started taking them. I don't think we ever saw them both on the pitch at the same time getting a penalty after that point. But now Rafinha's gone. He should get them back. Rafinha being gone is obviously a problem. A big part of Leeds' creativity came from him. But I think Bamford is good enough. His movement is good enough to kind of help create chances himself, get into those right positions that someone else can get that ball in the box to him. And that is why I think he'll do well. Like, his underlying numbers since he's come into the Premier League have been extremely impressive. Last season's, yes, was off the back of a very small sample size, but the previous season, obviously under Bielsa when Leeds first came up, was decent. I think Jesse Marsch will find a way to get Leeds going again in attack. It's just whether or not that will happen in game week 1 with all the new signings. So I can see why people don't want to go for him, but I do think he's one of those players we might ignore and regret doing so. With Wilson and Watkins, the fixtures are just worse, right? I don't think, from an attacking point of view, Villa's fixtures are that great. I've talked about this on Twitter, that Crystal Palace's numbers last year were pretty good. I am sceptical about whether they can keep that up, but I don't see it as an easy fixture. And then even if you do, after that, it's West Ham, Arsenal and Man City. So I feel like you're really banking on Bournemouth and Everton to get some points. And then after that, you know, probably transferring him on, right? Or selling him for someone else. And I just don't think that's necessarily the best way to go about it. He also probably doesn't have penalties. Gerrard has said it's up for grabs. He doesn't really have a great penalty record. I wouldn't trust him, right? I think for some players, when they've got penalties, you're happy, right? Because they step up. You know pretty much they're going to score. Kane and Salah. I wouldn't have that with Watkins. If I owned Watkins and he went to take a penalty, I would be slightly concerned. I put Wilson just ahead because he does have penalties, and if he's fit, he'll also be nailed on. And I do think Newcastle's fixtures are maybe slightly better, but the fact they've got to play Man City and Liverpool in the opening 5 would probably put me off them as well. So I think the 7.5 million bracket is almost a little bit dead just because of the fixtures and or maybe some slight concerns over Leeds. But if I was going to pick one, I'd probably go for Bamford. Okay, so for 7 million, I think that Ivan Toney is the out-and-out best option. The reason for that is you know what you're going to get. Okay, he's nailed on 80 to 90 minutes most games on penalties. A bit like Harry Kane, just without the same output. And the fixtures are also good for Brentford, and I think they can be a team that does attack well. Thomas Frank will want them to go and get goals in these opening 6 fixtures. And one thing I've seen a lot of Brentford fans kind of argue back to other fans is the Eriksen factor, that he was the reason they did so well. Now they don't have him. But also a lot of them are pointing out that the switch to 4-3-3 also really helped. And obviously, whatever formation they play, Toney is going to play. But that 4-3-3 could really help him. I think what we need to see from the first 6 is maybe a bit more consistency in where he gets his points for us. Because last year, he actually got a good amount of goals and assists over the season. They just didn't necessarily come when we wanted them to. And so hopefully, you know, Leicester, Fulham, Everton, Palace, Leeds, that will happen in the first 6. So I think for 7 million, he's probably the best option right now. Martial is starting to pick up a little bit of pace, right? And we knew this would happen. As soon as Man United started doing well, their players are nicely priced outside of Fernandes and Ronaldo. They're going to be popular. Now, a lot of Martial relies on Ronaldo leaving, because if he doesn't, Ronaldo's not just going to sit on the bench all season. He will be the main number 9, and then that leaves question marks over how often Martial will play. Will he go to the left? Will he just be on the bench? So Ronaldo needs him to go. Or Ronaldo needs to go, for Martial to be an option. One thing I really like about Man United right now, and again, look, he scored 3 in 3 games in pre-season, at least at the time recording. There might have been another game by the time you watch this. And yes, it's pre-season. We take it with a pinch of salt. A lot of the teams they've played, like Palace and Liverpool, for example, they did play weakened teams. But the fact that Man United are playing some of their first 11 quite regularly, I think that's actually a good thing, right? Liverpool, Man City, Spurs, they're going to be great no matter what happens in pre-season. Man United aren't. Their players need minutes under Ten Hag to get to learn how he wants them to play. And the fact that Rashford, Martial and Sancho, that front 3, has played quite regularly, I think that's a good thing. And I think Martial is one of those players that needs to get regular minutes. He needs to know the manager wants to play him, believes in him, and that he's going to get regular game time. I think without that, I just don't think he copes that well with it, right? So I think he's potentially a good option. I don't want to get too excited because, again, it's pre-season, weakened teams, etc. But it is helping them learn how Ten Hag wants to play. And I think Brentford, Brighton and Southampton in the opening 4 are not that bad. So if you wanted to take more of a punt, and Ronaldo leaves, or he's not there at the start of the season, he's not in the squad or whatever, then Martial is an okay option, I think. I think Toney probably is just a better option. He's a safer pick, a more solid pick. But there's nothing wrong with going with Martial the way Man United are trying to play. The only thing is, can they continue playing like that when they actually come up against some first 11 Premier League opposition, or will they collapse, right? When players start putting more pressure on the ball, they play with a higher intensity, will Man United still be able to cope with that? That's the big question. If you're someone that likes a bit of a punt, maybe he's got a fairly solid team, wants 1 to 2 slightly differential players, Martial could be the one. Jimenez, I just don't like him as an option. I think he hasn't been the same player since he came back from injury. He went on a few small runs last year of a decent amount of goals. I got him at the right time, got quite lucky. But ultimately, underlying numbers not fantastic. The fixtures are really good, which is why a lot of us are looking at Pedro Neto. But I think for 7 million, I'd either just take a punt on Martial or go for the slightly safer option in Ivan Toney. I think, unless Wolves buy anyone new for that number 9 position, Jimenez should play quite regularly. And I wouldn't put it past him to get something because the fixtures are so good. But I just don't think I could put him in my team for Game Week 1. I just don't think he's necessarily the same player as he was. Maybe that will change this year. Maybe if Bruno Laga goes for a 4 at the back, maybe that will also benefit him rather than having that wing-back formation. But I think I want to see that first before I go for him straight away. So I think for 6.5 million, Mitrovic might still be the best option. I know Fulham's opening 6 fixtures. They're not ideal at all, right? They've got to play all of Liverpool, Arsenal and Spurs. Brentford, Brighton and Wolves are not necessarily pushovers either. But at least with Mitrovic, again, a bit like Toney, you get that player that's absolutely nailed on, going to play pretty much 90 minutes every game. Scored a lot of goals last year. It's a different manager to when he was last in the league as well, and has penalties. So there's a lot to like about Mitrovic. And again, if you want to put someone in that bracket who's not a punt, who you know is going to play, you're not going to have to worry about using the transfer on, Mitrovic is probably the one to look at. The rest of them just come with too many problems. Like for Brighton, for example, they usually play with 2 up top. Who will those 2 be? Welbeck played pretty well at the end of last season. It could be him plus one of Maupay or Undav, but we don't know exactly who. A lot of Brighton fans seem to think that Undav will be the number 1 striker at some point. There's just some disagreement over whether it will be from Game Week 1 or not. So that's why I haven't included Maupay in here. The problem with Welbeck is, yes, he might continue to play well, but he's not necessarily guaranteed to start every week as well. Even like Trossard has played as part of the front 2 before. So there's quite a few options that can play in those positions. So again, if you wanted a bit more of a punt, you could go for Welbeck. But the opening 3, Man United, Newcastle and West Ham, not necessarily that great. It's really from Game Week 4 onwards. So I think if I was going to go for a Brighton player, I'd maybe look a bit cheaper, or just, maybe go for someone that's a little bit more nailed on, like Trossard. I know he's not a forward, but he should play most games. But ultimately, I think there's probably a little bit too much rotation. And with Che Adams, again, it's just those opening fixtures. I just don't trust Southampton to get enough goals against Spurs, against Man United, against Chelsea, even maybe against Leicester with their, a lot of their defenders now back to kind of full fitness as well. So Che Adams is okay. Again, his underlying numbers are okay. He should get a good amount of minutes for Southampton as well. But I think about my team, and if I see Che Adams there for 6.5 million, I'm just never going to like it. Not from Game Week 1 anyway. So for me, I think if you want the guaranteed option, you've just got to go for Mitrovic and just take into account the fixtures aren't great, but at least he's going to play. At least he's got penalties. At least he scored a hell of a lot of goals last season. And hopefully he'll do better than the last time he was in the Premier League. So I think if fixtures are better, Solanke would probably be the number 1 £6 million option from the get-go. The problem is I keep looking at game weeks 2 to 4, Man City and Liverpool away with Arsenal in the middle. I just can't get past that, and that's why I probably can't have him in my team straight away. I think the fixtures from game week 5 and 6 onwards are really good for Bournemouth, and I think he probably will be a popular option on early wildcards, just not necessarily from game week 1. All the same things as with Mitrovic, nailed on 90 minutes, penalties, loads of good reasons to maybe go for him. And again, there's nothing wrong with picking those consistent players that are going to play every single week. Like sometimes the punts sound more fun, but if they don't get regular minutes, they ain't going to get you points anyway. But I just think, again, game weeks 2 to 4 just not good enough. And ultimately, I know a lot of people will be seeing Bournemouth as a team that might go straight back down, but just remember players like Pukki have done well in the past, even though they play for a team that's gone straight back down, because when you're playing every week and you got penalties, you're going to get a few goals along the way. So I do like Solanke. I just think the fixtures kind of put me off. To be honest, Awoniyi for Nottingham Forest is not that much better. in the opening 5, he also has to play Spurs and Man City. It's just that you at least get Newcastle, West Ham and Everton before that. How well he'll do remains to be seen, and maybe he's a bit more of a punt than Solanke because he's new to Nottingham Forest. Nottingham Forest have got a lot of new signings to embed as well. But again, I am someone that likes stats, and his underlying numbers from the Bundesliga do look pretty good. Some people might argue that Mbeumo should be the best £6 million forward because the fixtures, like we talked about with Tony, are pretty good. I just think there's a chance that Awoniyi might get penalties. If not, Brennan Johnson might be the better option. And again, Solanke's just always going to get you minutes. Mbeumo should start most games, but he could be a player that comes off a little bit earlier. That's why I've put him in 3rd place. Again, because of fixtures, you might put him in first, but I think later on especially, and I know we're looking at game week 1 squads, but later on I think the other two will definitely be in our squads ahead of Mbeumo. So I've only included 2 5.5 million players. I think players like Gelhardt are just not secure for minutes, right? If Leeds only play with one up front, that will almost certainly be Bamford, and Gelhardt would have to make do with minutes off the bench. Then you've got players like Mateta and Edouard at Crystal Palace. They're not necessarily guaranteed a lot of minutes. They might start, but they often come off early, and Crystal Palace's fixtures are not great. So I think Undav is the one. I've kind of already mentioned him. Again, Brighton fans seem to think that he will be the #1 striker. It just remains to be seen whether that's from game week 1 or not. So he's possibly a wait and see, because in midfield there are options at 5.5 million and even 6 million if you've got a little bit of extra money, who are probably better picks from game week 1. But again, on an early wildcard, if Undav is the first pick, bearing in mind Brighton do create a few chances, he could be a really nice option. Again, pre-season might indicate that to us. We'll have to wait and see who gets the most minutes out of him and more pay, especially in the kind of, penultimate game and the game before that in pre-season. But right now, I'd just be a little bit worried about his minutes. It might be one to go for in the future. And I wanted to mention Broja because, look, I don't expect him to get many minutes at Chelsea at all, especially in the league, but he might go somewhere else. And if he goes somewhere where he's going to be the #1 striker, I really like him at 5.5 million. If he goes to West Ham, where there are rumours about it, I just don't think he gets straight in ahead of Antonio. I know Antonio was poor for a lot of last season, but part of that was not having a striker to play in other matches and give Antonio a rest. So I don't think Antonio is done for. I don't think that if Broja goes to West Ham, he necessarily plays week in, week out. And obviously the fixtures I got on screen are for Chelsea. But if he does get himself into the first team and playing regularly anywhere, he's definitely going to be in a lot of squads. I just think for 5.5 million and probably below, so like the 5 million and 4.5 million options as it stands right now are just not playing options. I just wouldn't put them in there unless you need a cheap forward bench option like a Greenwood at Leeds or whoever it is, right? But yeah, for 5.5, I think Undav is probably looking like the one, maybe Broja if he moves. So there we go. Like I said, I'm not including the 4.5 and 5 million forwards because ultimately I don't expect most of them to play any minutes unless they get moved somewhere else, and they're just not worth including on our side unless you want to put them as kind of bench fodder. So let me know on that list who you're thinking of going with. Are you tempted by Martial, Ivan Toney? Is Mbeumo worth a shout for 6 million? Who is making it in your game week 1 side? Let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed that series, please do keep giving it a like on all the videos. The support has been incredible, and obviously hit subscribe as well if you are new around here. I'll leave it there and I'll catch you tomorrow for another video.